The bunker wall didn't just break. It detonated into a million shards of molten crystal as the Purge-class drone hammered its way inside. Jace didn't think he acted with the reflexive speed of a true Death Worlder. Throwing himself over Lyra's prone form, the heat of the blast scorched the back of his jacket, but all he felt was the frantic, electric pulse of her heart against his chest. Lyra's hands, usually still, gripped his forearms with a strength that defied her glitched biocircuitry. He looked down, meeting eyes that burned with gold light. "We are not dying here," he snarled over the screech of tearing metal. Before the fire, before the drone, there was only the blinding radiance of the obsidian wastes and the stubborn refusal of a man who didn't know how to quit. Jace Vane was a scavenger, a man who lived by the rule that everything in this science fiction story of a universe was fixable if you hit it hard enough. He had been navigating the jagged peaks of Lethe for 3 solar cycles, searching for the tech scraps of the Galactic Council's forgotten wars. The wastes were meant for the dead, but Jace was too stubborn to let the quiet win. He moved with a heavy, deliberate grace, fueled by the human ingenuity that had allowed his species to survive planets others deemed uninhabitable. To the rest of the galaxy, he was a space orc, a scavenger of the void. But to himself, he was just a man looking for a reason to keep breathing. He found her near a crashed Uthelgard spire, Lyra Solis. Even covered in the fine, glowing dust of the wastes, she looked like a fallen star. She was a noble of the hegemony, discarded like junk because her internal code hadn't been perfect. They called it a glitch. Jace called it a tragedy. When he first pulled her from the wreckage, he expected her to be a cold machine, but the heat radiating from her skin was undeniable. It was the Terran spirit in him that reached out, refusing to leave a soul behind. This was the essence of HFY, that stubborn, irrational drive to protect. Humans don't worship problems. We argue with them until they break. In the cramped quarters of his makeshift bunker, Jace worked. He wasn't just fixing a machine. He was tending to a girl who had forgotten she had the power of agency. Every time his fingers brushed against the shimmering ports on her spine, a spark of pure energy jumped between them. It wasn't just static. It was the magnetic pull of 2 people who had been told they were nothing, realizing they might be everything to each other. She wasn't a broken weapon. She was a girl who finally learned to say no. He had spent weeks recalibrating her systems, sharing his meager rations, and telling her stories of Earth, a place she'd never see, but seemed to understand through the sheer intensity of his voice. The galaxy feared humanity not for their guns, but for their habit of befriending the impossible. Lyra watched him with an intensity that made his blood hum. She was the potential apex predator of the digital world, even if her legs wouldn't move, and he was the shield that kept the harsh light of Lethe at bay. In this sci-fi reality, altruism as evolution was his only card to play. He chose to save the inefficient, and in doing so, he found a new definition of humanity. The proximity was electric, a constant hum of shared breath and whispered plans in the dark. Jace felt a protective instinct he couldn't name, a drive that went beyond survival. He was a Death Worlder, and he would burn the galaxy down before he let her be recycled. But the hegemony didn't like losing its property, and the sky was already beginning to glow with the coming storm of the Purge-class fleet. The drone's primary sensor pulsed a lethal crimson, scanning the bunker for the biological heat of the 2 fugitives. Jace didn't give it a second chance to lock on. He lunged across the floor, his fingers screaming as they wrapped around the white-hot casing of the thermal core. It was a piece of pure, unadulterated power, the kind of high-yield tech the Galactic Council thought only their elite could handle. They didn't count on the Terran's spirit, the raw, physical stubbornness that allowed a man to hold on to fire if it meant protecting the person beside him. "Hold on," Jace barked, his voice straining against the roar of the drone's cooling fans. Lyra didn't flinch. She reached out, her fingers interlocking with his free hand. The connection was instantaneous and staggering. The biocircuitry in her spine didn't just flicker, it ignited with a brilliant golden intensity. This was the moment of true human ingenuity, where the biological met the digital in a symphony of defiance. She wasn't a broken weapon anymore. She was an apex predator of the network, and the hegemony was about to learn that she had finally learned how to say no. Her consciousness surged through Jace and into the drone's uplink, bypassing layers of encryption with the speed of a solar flare. Jace felt the feedback of her power, a vibrating, magnetic hum that made his teeth ache and his heart race. He could see the reflection of the data streams in her eyes, a shimmering cascade of light that turned the bunker into a cathedral of energy. He slammed the thermal core into the drone's primary capacitor just as Lyra hijacked its command signal. The machine let out a high-pitched whine of overcharged circuits before its weapons pivoted toward the sky. Outside, the Purge-class ships descending through the atmosphere suddenly found their own automated defenses turning against them. It was a masterpiece of tactical subversion. The galaxy feared humanity not for their guns, but for their habit of befriending the impossible. And here was the proof: a scavenger and a glitched noble, tearing down a fleet with a piece of junk and a choice. The explosion of the drone threw them backward, the shockwave rolling over them like a physical weight. Jace hit the bulkhead hard, his breath leaving him in a sharp gasp, but he never let go of Lyra's hand. The heat in the room was intense, but the relief was greater. Above them, the clouds of Lethe were lit with the brilliant streaks of retreating ships and falling debris. They had won. As the fires dimmed to a steady, warm glow, Jace looked at Lyra. She was sitting up, her movements no longer stiff or programmed, but fluid and alive. The paralysis that had defined her existence had been a cage of code, one she had finally broken from the inside out. "Why did you stay?" she whispered, her voice clear and resonant in the wake of the battle. Jace wiped a streak of carbon from his forehead and offered a crooked, tired smile. "Because being a Death Worlder means we don't know when to quit on people." They left the obsidian wastes behind that night, steering a salvage shuttle toward the distant, beckoning stars. They were no longer a scavenger and a discard. They were the architects of their own fate. As they breached the atmosphere, Lyra looked back at the planet one last time, sending a final pulse of data out into the void. It wasn't a distress signal or a command. It was a lesson for the galactic superintelligence that had tried to claim her. It was a testament to the power of agency, the simple human truth that value isn't measured by perfection, but by the courage to choose your own path. Would you like me to develop a new narrative prompt based on a different genre combination, or perhaps expand on the technical specifications of the hegemony technology?